The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Savoy didn't just light the room, they seemed to demand perfection from everyone beneath them. Waiters moved like ghosts, ensuring that the wine flowed as freely as the gossip among the city's power brokers. Elena kept her head down, her eyes focused on the silver tray in her hands. She had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being invisible. To the wealthy men in silk suits and the women in five-figure gowns, she wasn't a person. She was furniture that breathed. Then she reached the Romano table. Sofia Romano, the self-proclaimed Mafia princess, was laughing, her voice a sharp, jagged edge against the soft classical music. She was draped in silk the color of a fresh bruise, her diamonds catching the light with every theatrical gesture. As Elena leaned in to replace a spent flute of champagne, Sophia leaned back suddenly, her elbow colliding with Elena's arm. A splash of gold liquid darkened the hem of Sophia's dress. The laughter died instantly. The surrounding tables went silent, a vacuum of sound that sucked the air out of the ballroom. Sophia looked down at the spot on her skirt, her face contorting into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She didn't look at the dress. She looked at Elena. "Do you have any idea what this costs?" Sophia hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This silk is worth more than your life. You're lucky if I let you keep your hands after this." Elena didn't flinch. She reached for a linen napkin. "I apologize, Miss Romano. I'll get a club soda." "Don't speak to me," Sophia snapped. She stood up, her chair screeching against the marble floor like a dying animal. The girl was used to total submission. She was used to seeing the light of hope go out in people's eyes the moment they realized who she was. Sophia pulled her hand back, her palm flat and lethal, intending to leave a mark that would humiliate the waitress in front of every influential family in the state. The slap was fast, fueled by years of unchecked privilege. But it never landed. The sound that followed wasn't the wet smack of skin on skin. It was the dull, heavy thud of bone meeting a palm. Elena hadn't even dropped her tray. With a movement so fluid it looked rehearsed, her left hand had shot up, intercepting Sophia's wrist mid-air. Elena's grip was like a vice. There was no hesitation, no trembling. She didn't just stop the blow, she neutralized it. The Mafia princess froze, her arms suspended in the air, her face inches from Elena's. Up close, Sophia saw something that terrified her more than a gun. She didn't see fear in the waitress's eyes. She saw a cold, mechanical calculation. Elena's gaze was flat, as if she were looking through Sophia at a target that didn't matter. "Don't," Elena said. The word was quiet, barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. Behind them, the Don, Sophia's father, narrowed his eyes. His hand, which had been reaching for his glass, stopped. He didn't look angry. He looked fascinated. His daughter was gasping, trying to pull her arm back, but Elena held her firm for 1 second longer than necessary, just to let the message sink in. Elena finally let go, her hand dropping back to her side as if nothing had happened. She stepped back, bowing her head slightly, returning to the mask of the invisible servant. But the damage was done. The hierarchy had been shattered in a heartbeat. "I'll bring that club soda now," Elena said calmly, turning her back on the most dangerous woman in the room. The silence in the ballroom was heavy, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Sofia Romano stood frozen, her wrist still tingling from the waitress's iron grip. Her face, usually a porcelain mask of aristocratic boredom, was now flushed a deep, humiliated crimson. She looked around the room and saw the mirrored reflections of the city's elite. They weren't looking at her with the usual fear. They were looking at her with pity. And some, she realized with a jolt of horror, were fighting back smirks. You servant," Sophia hissed, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You're dead. You're already dead." She turned toward the shadows at the edge of the room, where two of the family's most lethal enforcers, Marco and Lucio, were already stepping forward. Their hands moved toward the concealed holsters beneath their tailored jackets. The guests held their breath, expecting the marble floor to be stained with more than just spilled wine. Stop. The word wasn't shouted, but it cut through Sophia's hysterics like a blade. Don Lorenzo Romano sat perfectly still at the head of the table. He was a man who had built an empire on the bodies of those who underestimated him, yet he wasn't looking at his daughter. His dark, piercing eyes were locked entirely on Elena. "Father, she touched me," Sophia shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the waitress. "Kill her, now!" The Don raised a single finger, and the two enforcers stopped in their tracks, as if hitting an invisible wall. He leaned forward, the light from the chandeliers glinting off the silver at his temples. He studied Elena, who stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her posture straight and her expression unreadable. She didn't look like a woman waiting for an execution. She looked like a soldier waiting for a command. "Look at her eyes, Sophia," the Don said, his voice surprisingly calm. Sophia blinked, confused. "What?" "Look at them," he repeated. "Those are not the eyes of a waitress. Those are warrior eyes. I haven't seen that look since I was in the mountains of Sicily, facing men who knew they were going to die and didn't care." Elena didn't blink. She met the Don's gaze with a terrifying level of equality. She knew exactly who he was, and she wasn't impressed. And to her, he was just another variable in a tactical equation. "Get out," Don Romano said, finally looking at his daughter. "Yes, send her away," Sophia crowed, a triumphant smile returning to her lips. "Throw her in the alley." "Not her, Sophia. You," the Don corrected. "You have embarrassed this family more with your lack of control than this woman did with her hands. Go to the car. Now. Before I decide that you need a more permanent lesson in humility." The shock on Sophia's face was total. She looked at her father, then at the silent, watching crowd, and finally back at Elena. The waitress didn't even give her the satisfaction of a smirk. She simply stepped aside to clear the path. With a choked sob of rage and shame, Sophia grabbed her silk clutch and sprinted from the room, the sound of her heels echoing like gunfire against the floor. The Don turned back to Elena. The rest of the room remained frozen, terrified to move until the master of the house gave the signal. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elena, sir," she replied, her voice steady. "Elena," he mused, tapping a rhythmic beat on the mahogany table. "You have a very specific set of skills for someone who clears plates for a living. My daughter is a spoiled child who thinks the world belongs to her because of my name. You showed her it doesn't. That is a dangerous thing to do in this house." "I only protected myself, sir," Elena said. "And you did it without breaking a sweat," the Don noted, a small, dangerous smile playing on his lips. "Most people would be halfway to the border by now. You're still standing here waiting for the club soda. I like that. But Sophia won't forget this. And she is my daughter. Which means her grudges are my business." He stood up, signaling the end of the night. "Don't bother coming back for your shift tomorrow, Elena. You've outgrown this uniform." As the Don walked away, followed by his silent shadows, Elena felt the weight of the room's attention shift. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a target. The morning light that filtered through Elena's cracked window was gray and unforgiving. She didn't need an alarm clock. Her body was already tuned to the frequency of danger. The previous night's confrontation at the gala played in her mind like a looped security tape. She knew the rules of the world she had tried to leave behind. Humiliation was a debt that men like the Romanos always collected with interest. By noon, the collection began. Elena arrived at the bistro where she worked her second shift, only to find the owner standing outside on the sidewalk, refusing to look her in the eye. He was a good man who had given her a chance when her resume was a blank slate, but today his hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette. "I can't do it, Elena," he muttered, staring at his shoes. "Two men in black suits came by this morning. They didn't break anything. They just sat there and described exactly what would happen to my daughter's car if you walked through that door. I'm sorry. You're a great worker, but I have a family. He handed her a final envelope of cash, less than she was owed, but all he could spare. Elena took it without a word. She didn't argue or plead. She understood the gravity of a Romano threat. It was a poison that moved through the city's veins, paralyzing anyone it touched. It's okay, Leo, she said softly. I understand. She spent the rest of the afternoon walking, feeling the invisible eyes of the city on her. She felt the shift in the atmosphere, the way the neighborhood snitches turned their heads when she passed. Sofia Romano wasn't just angry, she was systematic. She was stripping Elena of her livelihood, her connections, and her safety, piece by piece. When Elena finally reached her small third-floor walk-up, she knew before she touched the knob that the sanctuary was gone. The door was slightly ajar, the wood splintered around the lock. She stepped inside, her boots crunching on broken glass. The apartment had been turned into a graveyard of her few possessions. Her mattress was slashed to ribbons, her clothes were shredded, and the small collection of books she had gathered were torn and scattered like fallen leaves. On the kitchen wall, written in red lipstick that looked unnervingly like blood, was a single word: beg. In the center of the wreckage stood Sophia. She looked out of place in the cramped, dingy room, wearing a white designer coat that cost more than the building itself. She was holding a small framed photo Elena had kept hidden, the only thing she had left from her former life. You look tired, Elena, Sophia said, her voice dripping with a cruel, artificial sweetness. It's amazing how fast a life can fall apart when the right person pushes it. You have no job, you have no home, and soon you'll have no breath left in your lungs. Sophia dropped the photo, letting the glass shatter against the floor. She stepped forward, expecting Elena to fall to her knees. She wanted the tears. She wanted the frantic apologies. She wanted to feel the power she had lost at the gala when Elena had gripped her wrist. All you have to do is ask for my forgiveness, Sophia whispered, leaning in close. Kiss my shoes, tell me you're a nothing, and maybe I'll tell my father to let you live in the gutter instead of a grave. Elena looked around the ruined room, then back at the girl in front of her. A small, chilling smile touched the corners of Elena's mouth. It wasn't the smile of a victim. It was the smile of someone who had just been relieved of their last reason to play nice. You think this is my life, Sophia? Elena asked, her voice steady and terrifyingly cold. These are just things. I've lived in holes in the ground deeper than this. I've survived people much smarter than you. Elena stepped over the broken glass, moving into Sophia's personal space. The princess instinctively flinched, remembering the grip from the night before. I'm not going to beg, Elena said, because you didn't just take my job and my bed, you took away my reason to stay hidden. And that was the only thing keeping you safe. Elena stared at the red lipstick on her wall, but she wasn't seeing the ruined apartment anymore. Her mind drifted back 3 years, far away from the smells of cheap floor wax and stale coffee. She saw a different version of herself, one draped in matte black tactical gear, crouched on a rooftop in a city that didn't exist on any civilian map. In that life, her name wasn't Elena. She was Wraith, the lead extraction specialist for a ghost unit that answered only to the highest levels of the government. She hadn't cleared tables. She had cleared rooms of armed insurgents in less than 6 seconds. Her hands, now rough from dishwater, had once been precision instruments capable of dismantling a security system or a human ribcage with equal ease. The mission that changed everything was supposed to be a standard retrieval in Eastern Europe. Her team, men she had bled with, men she called brothers, had been tasked with securing a drive containing the identities of deep cover assets. But as they reached the extraction point, the comms went silent. The rhythmic thump of a helicopter grew louder, but it wasn't a rescue bird. It was a hit squad. She remembered the look on her commander's face, Captain Miller, as he looked at her through the sights of his rifle. He hadn't been compromised. He had been bought. The unit had decided that the data on that drive was worth more on the black market than their loyalty to the flag. They had turned their guns on their own, starting with the one person who could stop them, Elena. She had survived the ambush by sliding down a burning elevator shaft, her skin searing as she plunged into the darkness of the city's sewers. She had spent weeks crawling through the shadows of Europe, bleeding, starving, and erasing every digital footprint she had ever made. She realized then that in her world, excellence was a death sentence. To be the best was to be a threat to the corrupt men in power. When she finally reached America, she made a choice. She would become the one thing a man like Miller or a Don like Romano would never notice: a servant. She traded her tactical knife for a serving tray and her thermal goggles for a pair of tired eyes. She leaned into the invisibility of the working class, finding a strange, hollow peace in the repetitive motions of pouring water and taking orders. Being a nothing was the only way to stay alive. Standing now in her trashed living room, Elena looked down at the shattered remains of the one photo she had kept, a grainy shot of her graduation from the academy, her face blurred even then. Sofia Romano had broken the glass, thinking she was destroying a memory. In reality, she was breaking the seal on a cage. The waitress persona was a costume Elena had worn to hide from the ghosts of her past. But as she felt the familiar, cold adrenaline begin to pump through her veins, she realized the costume didn't fit anymore. Sofia wanted a war. Bon and the Romano family wanted a victim. They had no idea they had just invited a wolf back into the fold. Elena reached under the floorboard beneath her radiator, pulling out a small, vacuum-sealed bag that the intruders had missed. Inside was a burner phone, a stack of clean passports, and a ceramic blade that wouldn't set off a metal detector. She didn't feel fear. She felt a grim, familiar clarity. The Mafia princess thought she was playing a game of cat and mouse. She didn't realize she had just spent the morning poking a sleeping giant with a stick. Elena wasn't a waitress who knew how to fight. She was a predator who had forgotten how to hunt. And it was time to remember. The black SUV idling outside Elena's ruined apartment building didn't have to honk. Its presence alone was a command. Elena didn't run. She didn't reach for her ceramic blade. Instead, she walked down the stairs with a calm that unnerved the two suited men waiting by the curb. They didn't cuff her. They simply opened the door, a silent acknowledgement that she wasn't a captive, but a guest of a very dangerous man. The Romano estate was a fortress of limestone and iron, tucked away behind gates that promised a quick end to anyone uninvited. Inside, the air smelled of expensive tobacco and old money. Don Lorenzo Romano sat in a leather-bound library, his hands steepled over a desk made of dark, heavy oak. He didn't look up when Elena entered. He waited, letting the silence stretch until it felt like a physical weight. "My daughter spent the morning trying to erase you," the Don said finally, his voice like gravel grinding together. "She thinks she's winning. She thinks by taking your bed and your job, she has proven she is a Romano. She is a fool." Elena stood in the center of the room, her feet planted firmly. She didn't look at the priceless art on the walls or the armed guards in the corners. She looked only at the man who held the city in his grip. "She's your daughter, Lorenzo. You taught her that power is a hammer." The Don looked up, a spark of genuine amusement in his dark eyes. "I taught her that power is a tool. She just hasn't learned which end to hold. Last night, you didn't just stop her hand. You showed her that there are people in this world who do not care about her name. That is a lesson I have failed to give her for 20 years." He stood up and walked toward the window, looking out over the manicured gardens. "I have many enemies, Elena. Men who would love to use Sofia's arrogance against me. She is a liability because she is soft and loud. She needs someone who is hard and quiet, someone who knows how to survive when the lights go out." "I'm a waitress," Elena said, her voice flat, "and I am a simple businessman. the Don countered, turning back to face her. We are both lying. I know a professional when I see one. You have the posture of a woman who is killed and the eyes of a woman who has been betrayed. I don't care who you were before you moved into that rat-hole apartment. I only care about what you can do now. He leaned against his desk, his expression turning deadly serious. I want you to be her handler, her shadow, her teacher. You will go everywhere she goes. You will eat what she eats. And when she acts like a spoiled child, you will break her of the habit. You will teach her how to see a threat before it draws a breath. Elena felt the irony of the situation like a cold splash of water. The man whose daughter had just destroyed her life was now offering her a seat at his right hand. She hates me. She'll try to kill me the moment I'm in the same room. Let her try. The Don shrugged. It will be her first lesson in why she is failing. If you accept, your apartment is replaced. Your waitress life is gone. You will have my protection and a salary that makes that bistro look like a joke. If you refuse, well, Sophia has already made it clear that your life in this city is over anyway. It wasn't a request. It was a strategic maneuver. Elena looked at the Don and realized that this was her way back into the world she knew. She had tried being a ghost, and it had almost gotten her killed by a bratty girl in a silk dress. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and start operating again. She won't like me, Elena warned. I'm not paying you to be her friend, the Don replied. I'm paying you to make sure she survives being my daughter. The training didn't start in a gym with padded mats and air conditioning. It started at 4 a.m. in the damp, freezing basement of the Romano estate. Sophia arrived in designer leggings and a pout, her eyes puffy from a night of screaming at her father about his new hire. She expected a light workout, perhaps some vanity boxing to show off for her social media followers. Instead, she found Elena standing in the center of the concrete floor, wearing a gray sweatshirt and a look of absolute indifference. Take off the jewelry, Elena said, and her voice didn't echo. It hit the stone walls and dropped. The diamonds, the watch, the rings, everything. Sophia scoffed, crossing her arms. My father said you were here to protect me, not to rob me. These earrings cost more than your... Before Sophia could finish the sentence, Elena moved. It wasn't a strike meant to injure, but it was fast. Faster than anything Sophia had ever seen. Elena's hand swept past Sophia's ear, and a second later, the diamond stud was sitting in Elena's palm. Sophia gasped, clutching her earlobe, her face pale with shock. In a real fight, those are handles, Elena said, tossing the earring onto a wooden table. Someone grabs those and they rip your ear off. Do you want to be pretty? Or do you want to keep your head attached to your neck? The next 6 hours were a descent into a world Sophia didn't know existed. Elena didn't teach her how to punch, she taught her how to fall. She made Sophia drop to the hard concrete over and over until her shoulders were bruised and her breath came in ragged, sobbing gulps. Every time Sophia tried to pull rank, Elena simply increased the intensity. You think you're dangerous because men carry guns for you, Elena said, circling the trembling girl like a shark. But strip away the guards and the bank account, and what are you? You're a target. You've spent 20 years leaning on a name, Sophia. A name doesn't stop a knife. A name doesn't breathe for you when someone is crushing your throat. By noon, Sophia was a mess of sweat and tears. She collapsed against a brick pillar, her designer gear stained with floor grime. I can't. I'm a Romano. People are supposed to fear me. They fear your father, Elena corrected, crouching down so they were eye to eye. They tolerate you. There is a difference. Right now, if a rival family snatched you off the street, you'd be dead in 10 minutes because you'd be too busy telling them who your daddy is to notice the exit door. Elena picked up a training knife, dull wood, but heavy. She pressed the tip against Sophia's ribs. Fight back. Use that anger you had at the gala. Show me the princess. Sophia lunged, A clumsy, emotional swing that Elena dodged with a simple step to the left. Sophia stumbled and fell flat on her face. She stayed there for a long moment, the cool concrete against her cheek. For the first time in her life, the weight of her father's empire felt like a burden instead of a shield. She realized she was utterly, terrifyingly weak. Again, Elena commanded. Sophia stood up. Her legs were shaking and her pride was in tatters, but something shifted in her gaze. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, flickering spark of survival. She didn't look for a guard. She didn't look for her phone. She looked at Elena's feet, watching for the next move. Good, Elena whispered, almost to herself. The power dynamic had flipped. Sophia no longer saw a servant she could humiliate. She saw the only person who was telling her the truth. Elena wasn't breaking her down to be cruel. She was stripping away the fake princess to see if there was a real woman underneath. As the sun rose higher outside the basement windows, Sophia Romano took a fighting stance, finally realizing that her name was a lie, but her bruises were real. The high-end boutique on Fifth Avenue smelled of expensive perfume and quiet privilege. Sophia moved through the racks of silk and cashmere with a strange, newfound hesitation. Her fingers, bruised from the previous day's training, felt clumsy against the delicate fabrics. A few feet behind her, Elena stood near the glass entrance, her eyes never resting on the clothes. She was scanning the street, the shoppers, and the reflected glare of the sun on parked cars. "You look like you're waiting for a bomb to go off," Sophia muttered, holding up a dress she would have bought without a thought 2 days ago. Now, she just felt exposed. "I'm waiting for the moment you stop paying attention," Elena replied, her voice low. "In this city, the moment you feel safe is the moment you're most vulnerable." Sophia opened her mouth to snap back. But the retort died in her throat. The heavy glass door of the boutique swung open, and 3 men in nondescript delivery uniforms stepped inside. One carried a large floral arrangement. The other 2 had their hands tucked deep into their jacket pockets. Elena didn't wait for them to speak. She didn't wait for a weapon to appear. "Get down!" Elena screamed, her hand catching Sophia by the shoulder and hurling her behind a heavy marble display counter. The sound of suppressed gunfire shattered the boutique's silence. Mannequins exploded into shards of plastic and fabric. Sophia huddled on the floor, her hands over her head. The air suddenly filled with the smell of ozone and pulverized stone. She expected to hear the store's security guards intervene, but all she heard was the rhythmic, terrifyingly calm movement of Elena. Elena didn't have a gun, but she had the ceramic blade and a lifetime of muscle memory. As the first gunman rounded the corner of the counter, Elena didn't retreat. She lunged low, sweeping his legs out from under him and driving her palm into his chin with a sickening crack. Before he could hit the floor, she had stripped the pistol from his grip. She moved with a terrifying, predatory grace that Sophia had only seen in movies. Elena wasn't just defending, she was dismantling. She fired 2 precise shots into the second man's shoulder, dropping him instantly, then used the momentum to vault over a rack of evening gowns. The third man panicked, spraying bullets wildly into the ceiling, but Elena was already behind him. With a swift surgical strike to the back of his neck, the room went silent. It had taken exactly 11 seconds. Sophia peered over the edge of the marble, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw the 3 men neutralized on the floor. Then she looked at Elena. The waitress, the woman she had humiliated, the woman she had tried to ruin, was standing in the center of the wreckage. Her gray sweatshirt was torn, and a thin line of blood ran down her cheek from a glass shard, but her hands were steady as she cleared the chamber of the captured handgun. Elena looked down at Sophia. For the first time, there was no coldness in her eyes, only a grim, professional assessment. "Are you hit?" Sophia shook her head, her voice failing her. She looked at Elena's bleeding face, then at the hands that had just saved her life. This wasn't a servant. This wasn't a handler her father had bought. This was a human being who had walked through hell and carried the scars to prove it. "Why?" Sophia whispered, her voice cracking. "After everything I did to you, why did you jump in front of me?" Elena tucked the weapon into her waistband and offered a hand to the girl on the floor. "Because your father is paying me to keep you alive, but mostly because no one deserves to die in a dress shop just because their last name is a target." As Sophia took Elena's hand and pulled herself up, the barrier between them didn't just crack, it evaporated. Sophia didn't see a waitress anymore. She saw a woman who was stronger than the entire Romano Empire combined. For the first time in her life, the Mafia princess felt small, not because of fear, but because of respect. The high-speed adrenaline of the boutique attack had faded, replaced by the sterile, echoing quiet of a safe house on the outskirts of the city. The room was sparsely furnished, a far cry from the velvet and gold of the Romano estate. Elena sat at a small wooden table, methodically cleaning the cut on her cheek with a cotton ball and rubbing alcohol. She didn't flinch at the sting. To her, pain was just information. Across from her, Sophia sat on the edge of a moth-eaten sofa. Her white designer coat was ruined, stained with soot and the gray dust of pulverized drywall. She looked at her hands, which were still trembling. For the first time, she wasn't checking her reflection or reaching for her phone. She was just breathing. "They really tried to kill me," Sophia whispered, her voice small and hollow. "It wasn't like the movies. There was no music. Just that metallic smell." "Ozone and cordite," Elena said, not looking up from her work. "It's the smell of a world that doesn't care who your father is." Sophia looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The mask of the arrogant princess had slipped entirely, revealing a frightened 20-year-old girl who had spent her entire life walking on a golden tightrope. "Do you know why I hit you at the gala? Why I tried to ruin you?" Elena paused, the cotton ball poised mid-air. "Because you're spoiled. Because you thought you could." "No," Sophia said, a sob catching in her throat. "Because if I'm not the loudest, meanest person in the room, I'm invisible. And in my father's world, being invisible means you're next. I act like a monster so the real monsters will stay away. I thought if I could make everyone fear me, I wouldn't have to be afraid of them." She hugged her knees to her chest, looking smaller than Elena had ever seen her. "But today, when those men came through the door, I realized I'm nothing. I'm just a bargaining chip. My father loves me, I know he does, but I'm part of his business. I've never had a friend, Elena. I've had bodyguards, sycophants, and enemies. That's it." Elena set the medical supplies down and looked at the girl. She saw the same hollow isolation she had felt in her old unit, the realization that you are only as valuable as the purpose you serve. She remembered the betrayal of Captain Miller and the cold realization that loyalty was often just a transaction. "Fear is a shitty shield, Sophia," Elena said, her voice softening for the first time. "It keeps people away, but it doesn't keep you safe. Real safety comes from knowing exactly who you are when everything else is stripped away. Today, you didn't scream for your father. You stayed down, you listened, and you survived." Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of grime on her cheek. "You could have left. You could have taken that gun and walked out the back door. You don't owe us anything." "I don't do it for the money," Elena admitted, leaning back in her chair. "I spent 3 years trying to be a ghost because I was tired of the blood. But seeing you on that floor, I realized I'd rather be a target than a coward. You're not a bargaining chip to me, Sophia. You're a person. And as long as I'm breathing, nobody is taking you anywhere." Sophia looked at Elena, and for the first time she didn't see a threat or a servant. She saw a sister. She stood up, walked over to the table, and awkwardly placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. It was a hesitant gesture, one born of a girl who had never learned how to offer comfort. Elena didn't pull away. She reached up and briefly squeezed Sophia's hand, a silent pact made in the ruins of a shopping trip. In the heart of a city that wanted them both dead, the waitress and the princess had found the only thing more dangerous than a Romano's wrath, a true alliance. The peace of the safe house was shattered not by a grenade, but by the vibration of a phone. Elena picked it up, expecting the Don's gravelly check-in. Instead, the voice on the other end was a cold echo from a grave she thought she had dug years ago. It was Captain Miller. "I have to admit, Wraith, the waitress look was a nice touch," Miller said, his voice smooth and devoid of remorse. "But you were always too good to stay hidden. You made too much noise at that boutique. The Romano name is a lighthouse in this city, and you just climbed right to the top of it to wave us down." Elena's blood turned to ice. She looked across the room at Sophia, who was trying to fix a cup of instant coffee, her movements finally losing their frantic edge. Elena realized with a sickening jolt that she hadn't protected the girl. She had painted a target on her back. Her enemies weren't looking for a Mafia princess. They were looking for the operative who had escaped them with their secrets. "What do you want, Miller?" Elena asked, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "The drive, Elena. The one you took from the extraction point. We know you still have it. We also know that Don Romano values his daughter more than his empire. We've already made a deal with his inner circle. A little bit of money, a little bit of pressure, and the gates to that safe house just became very swinging doors." Before Elena could scream a warning, the perimeter alarms stayed silent, a sure sign they had been bypassed from the inside. The heavy oak front door didn't splinter. It was opened with a key. 3 men in tactical gear, the same matte black Elena used to wear, breached the room with surgical precision. They didn't use flashbangs. They didn't need them. They used gas canisters that flooded the small space with a sweet, heavy vapor. Elena scrambled for her ceramic blade, her vision already swimming. She took down the first man with a strike to the femoral artery, but her limbs felt like they were made of lead. "Elena!" Sophia cried out, reaching for a heavy glass vase, the only weapon she could find. She swung it with the desperate, raw form Elena had taught her, shattering it against a mercenary's helmet. It was a brave move, a warrior's move, but it wasn't enough against professionals. A gloved hand clamped over Sophia's mouth. Elena watched through a blurring haze as they dragged the girl toward the door. Sophia's eyes were wide, filled not with the entitled rage of a princess, but with the terrifying realization that she was being used as bait for her only friend. "Don't touch her," Elena wheezed, her knees hitting the floor. Miller stepped into her line of sight, looking down at her with a disappointed smirk. He hadn't aged a day. He still looked like the hero the public believed him to be. He kicked the ceramic blade away from her weakening grip. "She's just a girl, Elena. A spoiled brat who got in the way of grown-up business," Miller said, signaling his men to throw Sophia into the back of an armored van idling outside. "If you want her back, you bring the drive to the old shipyard at midnight. If I see a single Romano soldier or a single cop, I'll send her back to her father in a dozen different boxes." The door slammed shut, and the sound of the van pulling away echoed in the empty house. Elena lay on the floor, the gas burning her lungs, the silence of the room mocking her. She had tried to save a soul, and in doing so, she had led the wolves straight to the door. For a moment, the old Elena, the one who ran, the one who hid, wanted to disappear again. But then she saw the broken pieces of the coffee cup Sophia had dropped. She saw the smudge of grime on the floor where Sophia had fought back. Elena didn't feel like a ghost anymore. She felt like a storm. She dragged herself to the floorboards beneath the radiator and pulled out the drive. It was time to stop being the prey. The fog at the old shipyard was thick enough to swallow a person whole, but Elena moved through it like she was part of the mist. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform anymore. She was dressed in the tactical gear she had kept hidden for years, her movements silent and lethal. In her hand was the drive, the piece of plastic that had cost her everything, but her mind was entirely on the girl inside the rusting warehouse. Captain Miller stood in the center of the floor, surrounded by 4 of his best men. Sophia was tied to a chair, a bruise blossoming on her cheek, but she wasn't crying. When she saw Elena's shadow flicker against the corrugated metal wall, Sophia didn't scream for help. She narrowed her eyes and waited, her body tensed just as Elena had taught her in the basement. "Drop the drive and step into the light, Wraith," Miller shouted, his hand resting on his holster. "Don't try to be a hero, you know the math. 5 of us, 1 of you." Elena stepped out, the drive held high. "The math changed the moment you touched her, Miller." As Elena tossed the drive toward him, the distraction began. It wasn't Elena who moved first. It was Sophia. While Miller's men tracked the falling drive, Sophia used the jagged edge of a metal scrap she'd spent the last hour working loose from the chair to slice through her zip ties. She didn't run for the exit. She dove for the nearest guard's legs, tackling him with a raw, desperate strength that caught the professional off guard. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Elena moved like a whirlwind, her ceramic blade flashing in the dim light. She neutralized 2 men before they could even raise their rifles, her movements a blur of precision and rage. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was using every ounce of it to protect the future she had found in a spoiled girl who had become her sister. Sophia, pinned under the guard she had tackled, didn't panic. She remembered the lesson from the basement. In a real fight, those are handles. She reached up, grabbed the man's tactical headset and twisted with everything she had, slamming his head against the concrete floor. She scrambled up, panting, and found a discarded pistol. She didn't fire wildly. She held it with 2 hands, her eyes locking onto the last guard aiming at Elena's back. "Down!" Sophia screamed. Elena dropped. Sophia squeezed the trigger. The shot was loud, echoing like thunder in the hollow space, and the guard fell. Now it was just Elena and Miller. The captain looked at the girl he had dismissed as a brat, and the operative he had tried to break. He realized too late that he wasn't facing a waitress and a princess. He was facing a team. Elena didn't use a gun. She closed the distance in 3 strides, disarming Miller with a brutal joint lock that sent his weapon skittering across the floor. She drove him back against a shipping container, her forearm pinned against his throat. "You should have stayed in the shadows, Elena," Miller wheezed, his face turning purple. "The Romanos will never trust you now. You're a ghost with a name." "I'm not a ghost," Elena whispered, her voice cold and certain. "And I'm done hiding." She delivered a final, crushing blow that slumped Miller to the ground. He wasn't dead, but he was finished. His career, his secrets, and his power were over. Sophia walked over, the gun still in her hand, but her posture had changed. She didn't look like a girl waiting for her father to save her. She stood tall, her shoulders back, her eyes clear. She looked at the drive lying in the dirt and then at Elena. "What now?" Sophia asked. "Now, we go home," Elena said, wiping the blood from her lip. "But things are going to be different. No more hiding, no more princess acts." When they walked out of the shipyard, the sunrise was beginning to bleed through the fog. Don Romano's cars were waiting at the perimeter, but as the black doors opened, it was Sophia who stepped forward first. She didn't wait for a guard to open her door. She looked at her father's men with a gaze that commanded silence. She wasn't a Mafia princess anymore. She was a leader who had earned her scars. And by her side stood Elena, not a waitress, not a handler, but the woman who had taught her that the only person who can truly control you is the one you see in the mirror.